Unaccompanied Sonata. 1. Tuning Up. When Christian Haraldson was 6 months old, preliminary tests showed a predisposition toward rhythm and a keen awareness of pitch. There were other tests, of course, and many possible routes still open to him, but rhythm and pitch were the governing signs of his own private zodiac, and already the reinforcement began. Mr. and Mrs. Haraldson were provided with tapes of many kinds of sound and instructed to play them constantly, waking or sleeping. When Christian Haraldson was 2 years old, his 7th battery of tests pinpointed the future he would inevitably follow. His creativity was exceptional, his curiosity insatiable, his understanding of music so intense that on top of all the tests was written prodigy. Prodigy was the word that took him from his parents' home to a house in a deep, deciduous forest where winter was savage and violent and summer a brief, desperate eruption of green. He grew up cared for by unsinging servants, and the only music he was allowed to hear was birdsong and windsong, and the crackling of winter wood, thunder, and the faint cry of golden leaves as they broke free and tumbled to the earth, rain on the roof, and the drip of water from icicles, the chatter of squirrels, and the deep silence of snow falling on a moonless night. These sounds were Christian's only conscious music. He grew up with the symphonies of his early years, only distant and impossible to retrieve memory. And so he learned to hear music in unmusical things, for he had to find music, even when there was none to find. He found that colors made sounds in his mind. Sunlight in summer was a blaring chord, moonlight in winter a thin, mournful wail, new green in spring a low murmur in almost, but not quite, random rhythms, the flash of a red fox in the leaves, a gasp of startlement. And he learned to play all those sounds on his instrument. In the world were violins, trumpets, clarinets, and crumhorns, as there had been for centuries. Christian knew nothing of that. Only his instrument was available. It was enough. One room in Christian's house, which he had alone most of the time, he lived in, a bed, not too soft, a chair and table, a silent machine that cleaned him and his clothing, and an electric light. The other room contained only his instrument. It was a console with many keys, and strips and levers and bars, and when he touched any part of it, a sound came out. Every key made a different sound. Every point on the strips made a different pitch. Every lever modified the tone. Every bar altered the structure of the sound. When he first came to the house, Christian played, as children will, with the instrument, making strange and funny noises. It was his only playmate. He learned it well, could produce any sound he wanted to. At first he delighted in loud, blaring tones. Later he began to play with soft and loud, and to play 2 sounds at once, and to change those 2 sounds together to make a new sound, and to play again a sequence of sounds he had played before. Gradually, the sounds of the forest outside his house found their way into the music he played. He learned to make wind sing through his instrument. He learned to make summer one of the songs he could play at will. Green, with its infinite variations, was his most subtle harmony. The birds cried out from his instrument with all the passion of Christian's loneliness. And the word spread to the licensed listeners. "There's a new sound north of here, east of here. Christian Haraldson, and he'll tear out your heart with his songs." The listeners came, a few to whom variety was everything first, then those to whom novelty and vogue mattered most, and at last those who valued beauty and passion above everything else. They came and stayed out in Christian's woods, and listened as his music was played through perfect speakers on the roof of his house. When the music stopped, and Christian came out of his house, he could see the listeners moving away. He asked, and was told why they came. He marveled that things he did for love on his instrument could be of interest to other people. He felt, strangely, even more lonely to know that he could sing to the listeners and yet never be able to hear their songs. "But they have no songs," said the woman who came to bring him food every day. "They are listeners. You are a maker. You have songs, and they listen." "Why?" asked Christian innocently. The woman looked puzzled. "Because that's what they want most to do. They've been tested, and they are happiest as listeners. You are happiest as a maker. Aren't you happy?" "Yes," Christian answered, and he was telling the truth. His life was perfect, and he wouldn't change anything, not even the sweet sadness of the backs of the listeners as they walked away at the end of his songs. Christian was 7 years old. 2. First movement. For the third time, the short man with the glasses and a strangely inappropriate mustache dared to wait in the underbrush for Christian to come out. For the third time, he was overcome by the beauty of the song that had just ended, a mournful symphony that made the short man with glasses feel the pressure of the leaves above him, even though it was summer, and they had months left before they would fall. "The fall is still inevitable," said Christian's song. "Through all their life, the leaves hold within them the power to die, and that must color their life." The short man with glasses wept, but when the song ended and the other listeners moved away, he hid in the brush and waited. This time his wait was rewarded. Christian came out of his house and walked among the trees and came toward where the short man with glasses waited. The short man admired the easy, unpostured way that Christian walked. The composer looked to be about 30, yet there was something childish in the way he looked about him. The way his walk was aimless and prone to stop, so he would just touch, not break, a fallen twig with his bare toes. "Christian?" said the short man with glasses. Christian turned, startled. In all these years no listener had ever spoken to him. It was forbidden. Christian knew the law. "It's forbidden," Christian said. "Here," the short man with glasses said, holding out a small black object. "What is it?" The short man grimaced. "Just take it. Push the button and it plays." "Plays?" "Music." Christian's eyes opened wide. "But that's forbidden. I can't have my creativity polluted by hearing other musicians work. That would make me imitative and derivative instead of original." "Reciting," the man said. "You're just reciting that. This is the music of Bach." There was reverence in his voice. "I can't," Christian said. And then the short man shook his head. You don't know what you're missing." "But I heard it in your song when I came here years ago, Christian. You want this." "It's forbidden," Christian answered, for to him the very fact that a man who knew an act was forbidden still wanted to perform it was astounding, and he couldn't get past the novelty of it to realize that some action was expected of him. There were footsteps and words being spoken in the distance, and the short man's face became frightened. He ran at Christian, forced the recorder into his hands, then took off toward the gate of the preserve. Christian took the recorder and held it in a spot of sunlight through the leaves. It gleamed dully. "Bach," Christian said. Then, "Who is Bach?" But he didn't throw the recorder down, nor did he give the recorder to the woman who came to ask him what the short man with glasses had stayed for. "He stayed for at least 10 minutes. "I only saw him for 30 seconds, Christian answered. "And?" "He wanted me to hear some other music. He had a recorder." "Did he give it to you?" "No," Christian said. "Doesn't he still have it?" "He must have dropped it in the woods. He said it was Bach." "It's forbidden. That's all you need to know. If you should find the recorder, Christian, you know the law. I'll give it to you." She looked at him carefully. "You know what would happen if you listened to such a thing?" Christian nodded. "Very well. We'll be looking for it too. I'll see you tomorrow, Christian. And next time somebody stays after, don't talk to him. Just come back in the house and lock the doors." "I'll do that," Christian said. When she left, he played his instrument for hours. More listeners came, and those who heard Christian before were surprised at the confusion in his song. There was a summer rainstorm that night, wind and rain and thunder, and Christian found that he could not sleep. Not because of the music of the weather. He'd slept through 1,000 such storms. It was the recorder that lay behind the instrument against the wall. Christian had lived for nearly 30 years surrounded only by this wild, beautiful place and the music he himself made. But now he could not stop wondering. Who was Bach? Who is Bach? What is his music? How is it different from mine? Has he discovered things that I don't know? What is his music? What is his music? What is his music. Until at dawn, when the storm was abating and the wind had died, Christian got out of his bed, where he had not slept, but only tossed back and forth all night, and took the recorder from its hiding place and played it. At first it sounded strange, like noise, odd sounds that had nothing to do with the sounds of Christian's life. But the patterns were clear, and by the end of the recording, which was not even a half-hour long, Christian had mastered the idea of fugue, and the sound of the harpsichord preyed on his mind. Yet he knew that if he let these things show up in his music, he would be discovered. So he did not try a fugue. He did not attempt to imitate the harpsichord's sound. And every night he listened to the recording, for many nights, learning more and more until finally the watcher came. The watcher was blind, and a dog led him. He came to the door, and because he was a watcher, the door opened for him without his even knocking. "Christian Haraldson, where is the recorder?" the watcher asked. "Recorder?" Christian asked. Then he knew it was hopeless, and took the machine and gave it to the watcher. "Oh, Christian," said the watcher, and his voice was mild and sorrowful. "Why didn't you turn it in without listening to it?" "I meant to," Christian said. "But how did you know?" "Because suddenly there are no fugues in your work. Suddenly your songs have lost the only Bach-like thing about them. And you've stopped experimenting with new sounds. What were you trying to avoid?" "This," Christian said, and he sat down and on his first try duplicated the sound of the harpsichord. "Yet you've never tried to do that until now, have you? I thought you'd notice. Fugues and harpsichord. The two things you noticed first, and the only things you didn't absorb into your music. All your other songs for these last weeks have been tinted and colored and influenced by Bach, except that there was no fugue, and there was no harpsichord. You have broken the law. You were put here because you were a genius, creating new things with only nature for your inspiration. Now, of course, you're derivative, and truly new creation is impossible for you. You'll have to leave." "I know," Christian said, afraid, yet not really understanding what life outside his house would be like. "We'll train you for the kinds of jobs you can pursue now. You won't starve, you won't die of boredom. But because you broke the law, one thing is forbidden to you now. Music. Not all music. There is music of a sort, Christian, that the common people, the ones who aren't listeners, can have. Radio and television and record music. But living music and new music, those are forbidden to you. You may not sing. You may not play an instrument. You may not tap out a rhythm." "Why not?" The watcher shook his head. "The world is too perfect, too at peace, too happy for us to permit a misfit who broke the law to go about spreading discontent. The common people make casual music of a sort, knowing nothing better because they haven't the aptitude to learn it. But if you... never mind, it's the law. And if you make more music, Christian, you will be punished drastically." "Drastically." Christian nodded, and when the watcher told him to come, he came, leaving behind the house and the woods and his instrument. At first he took it calmly, as the inevitable punishment for his infraction, but he had little concept of punishment, or of what exile from his instrument would mean. Within 5 hours he was shouting and striking out at anyone who came near him, because his fingers craved the touch of the instrument's keys, and levers, and strips, and bars, and he could not have them, and now he knew that he had never been lonely before. It took 6 months before he was ready for a normal life, and when he left the retraining center, a small building because it was so rarely used, he looked tired and years older, and he didn't smile anymore. He became a delivery truck driver because the test said that this was a job that would least grieve him, and least remind him of his loss, and most engage his few remaining aptitudes and interests. He delivered donuts to grocery stores, and at night he discovered the mysteries of alcohol, and the alcohol and the donuts and the truck and his dreams were enough that he was, in his way, content. He had no anger in him. He could live the rest of his life without bitterness. He delivered fresh donuts and took the stale ones away with him. 3. Second movement. "With a name like Joe," Joe always said, "I had to open a bar and grill, just so I could put up a sign saying Joe's Bar and Grill." And he laughed and laughed, because after all, Joe's Bar and Grill was a funny name these days. But Joe was a good bartender, and the watcher had put him in the right kind of place. Not in a big city, but in a smaller town, a town just off the freeway, where truck drivers often came. A town not far from a large city, so that interesting things were nearby to be talked about and worried about and complained about and loved. Joe's Bar and Grill was, therefore, a nice place to come, and many people came there, not fashionable people and not drunks, but lonely people and friendly people in just the right mixture. "My clients are like a good drink. Just enough of this and that to make a new flavor that tastes better than any of the ingredients." Oh, Joe was a poet. He was a poet of alcohol, and like many another person these days, he often said, "My father was a lawyer, and in the old days I would have probably ended up a lawyer too, and I never would have known what I was missing." Joe was right, and he was a dang good bartender, and he didn't wish he were anything else, so he was happy. One night, however, a new man came in, a man with a donut delivery truck and a donut brand name on his uniform. Joe noticed him because silence clung to the man like a smell. Wherever he walked, people sensed it, and though they scarcely looked at him, they lowered their voices, or stopped talking at all, and they got reflective and looked at the walls and the mirror behind the bar. The donut delivery man sat in a corner and had a watered-down drink that meant he intended to stay a long time and didn't want his alcohol intake to be so rapid that he was forced to leave early. Joe noticed things about people, and he noticed that this man kept looking off in the dark corner where the piano stood. It was an old, out-of-tune monstrosity from the old days, for this had been a bar for a long time. And Joe wondered why the man was fascinated by it. True, a lot of Joe's customers had been interested, but they had always walked over and plunked on the keys, trying to find a melody, failing with the out-of-tune keys, and finally giving up. This man, however, seemed almost afraid of the piano, and didn't go near it. At closing time, the man was still there, and, on a whim, instead of making the man leave, Joe turned off the piped-in music, turned off most of the lights, and went over and lifted the lid and exposed the gray keys. The delivery man came over to the piano. "Chris," his name tag said. He sat and touched a single key. The sound was not pretty, but the man touched all the keys one by one, and then touched them in different orders, and all the time Joe watched, wondering why the man was so intense about it. "Chris?" Joe said. Chris looked up at him. "Do you know any songs?" Chris's face went funny. "I mean some of those old-time songs, not those fancy twitchers on the radio, but songs. In a little Spanish town, my mother sang that one to me." And Joe began to sing, "In a little Spanish town, 'twas on a night like this." Chris began to play as Joe's weak and toneless baritone went on with the song. But his playing wasn't an accompaniment. Not anything Joe could call an accompaniment. It was, instead, an opponent to his melody, an enemy to it, and the sounds coming out of the piano were strange and unharmonious and beautiful. Joe stopped singing and listened. For 2 hours he listened, and when it was over, he soberly poured the man a drink, and poured one for himself, and clinked glasses with Chris, the donut delivery man, who could take that rotten old piano and make the dang thing sing. 3 nights later, Chris came back, looking harried and afraid. But this time Joe knew what would happen, had to happen, and instead of waiting until closing time, Joe turned off the piped-in music 10 minutes early. Chris looked up at him pleadingly. Joe misunderstood. He went over and lifted the lid to the keyboard and smiled. Chris walked stiffly, perhaps reluctantly, to the stool and sat. "Hey, Joe!" one of the last 5 customers shouted. "Closing early?" Joe didn't answer, just watched as Chris began to play. No preliminaries this time. No scales and wanderings over the keys. Just power, and the piano was played as pianos aren't meant to be played. The bad notes, the out-of-tune notes, were fit into the music so that they sounded right, and Chris's fingers, ignoring the strictures of the 12-tone scale, played, it seemed to Joe, in the cracks. None of the customers left until Chris finished an hour and a half later. They all shared that final drink and went home shaken by the experience. The next night Chris came again, and the next, and the next. Whatever private battle had kept him away for the first few days after his first night of playing, he had apparently won it or lost it. None of Joe's business. What Joe cared about was the fact that when Chris played the piano, it did things to him that music had never done, and he wanted it. The customers apparently wanted it too. Near closing time, people began showing up, apparently just to hear Chris play. Joe began starting the piano music earlier and earlier, and he had to discontinue the free drinks after the playing because there were so many people it would have put him out of business. It went on for 2 long, strange months. The delivery van pulled up outside, and people stood aside for Chris to enter. No one said anything to him. No one said anything at all, but everyone waited until he began to play the piano. He drank nothing at all, just played, and between songs, the hundreds of people in Joe's bar and grill ate and drank. But the merriment was gone. The laughter and the chatter and the camaraderie were missing, and after a while, Joe grew tired of the music and wanted to have his bar back the way it was. He toyed with the idea of getting rid of the piano, but the customers would have been angry at him. He thought of asking Chris not to come anymore, but he could not bring himself to speak to the strange silent man. And so finally he did what he knew he should have done in the first place. He called the watchers. They came in the middle of a performance, a blind watcher with a dog on a leash, and a watcher with no ears who walked unsteadily, holding to things for balance. They came in the middle of a song, and did not wait for it to end. They walked to the piano and closed the lid gently, and Chris withdrew his fingers and looked at the closed lid. "Oh, Christian," said the man with the seeing-eye dog. "I'm sorry," Christian answered. "I tried not to. Oh, Christian, how can I bear doing to you what must be done?" "Do it," Christian said. And so the man with no ears took a laser knife from his coat pocket and cut off Christian's fingers and thumbs right where they rooted into his hands. The laser cauterized and sterilized the wound even as it cut, but still some blood spattered on Christian's uniform. And, his hands now meaningless palms and useless knuckles, Christian stood and walked out of Joe's bar and grill. The people made way for him again, and they listened intently as the blind watcher said, "That was a man who broke the law and was forbidden to be a maker. He broke the law a second time, and the law insists that he be stopped from breaking down the system that makes all of you so happy." The people understood. It grieved them. It made them uncomfortable for a few hours. But once they returned home to their exactly right homes and got back to their exactly right jobs, the sheer contentment of their lives overwhelmed their momentary sorrow for Chris. And after all, Chris had broken the law, and it was the law that kept them all safe and happy. Even Joe soon forgot Chris and his music. He knew he had done the right thing. He couldn't figure out, though, why a man like Chris would have broken the law in the first place, or what law he would have broken. There wasn't a law in the world that wasn't designed to make people happy. And there wasn't a law Joe could think of that he was even mildly interested in breaking. Yet, once Joe went to the piano and lifted the lid and played every key on the piano, and when he had done that, he put his head down on the piano and cried, because he knew that when Chris lost that piano, lost even his fingers so he could never play again, it was like Joe's losing his bar, and if Joe ever lost his bar, his life wouldn't be worth living. As for Chris, someone else began coming to the bar driving the same donut delivery van, and no one ever saw Chris again in that part of the world. 4. Third movement. "Oh, what a beautiful morning," sang the road crew man who had seen Oklahoma 4 times in his hometown. "Rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham," sang the road crew man who had learned to sing when his family got together with guitars. "Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom," sang the road crew man who believed. But the road crew man without hands, who held the signs telling the traffic to stop or go slow, listened, but never sang. "Why don't you never sing?" asked the man who liked Rodgers and Hammerstein. Asked all of them, at one time or another. And the man they called Sugar just shrugged. "I don't feel like singing," he'd say, when he said anything at all. "Why'd they call him Sugar?" a new guy once asked. "He don't look sweet to me." And the man who believed said, "His initials are C.H., like the sugar, C and H, you know?" And the new guy laughed. A stupid joke, but the kind of gag that makes life easier on the road-building crew. Not that life was that hard, for these men, too, had been tested, and they were in the job that made them happiest. They took pride in the pain of sunburn and pulled muscles, and the road growing long and thin behind them was the most beautiful thing in the world. And so they sang all day at their work, knowing that they could not possibly be happier than they were this day. Except Sugar. Then Guillermo came, a short Mexican who spoke with an accent. Guillermo told everyone who asked, "I may come from Sonora, but my heart belongs in Milano." And when anyone asked why, and often when no one asked anything, he'd explain, "I'm an Italian tenor in a Mexican body." And he proved it by singing every note that Puccini and Verdi ever wrote. "Caruso was nothing," Guillermo boasted. "Listen to this." Guillermo had records and sang along with them, and at work on the road crew he'd join in with any man's song and harmonize with it, or sing an obbligato high above the melody, a soaring tenor that took the roof off his head and filled the clouds. "I could sing," Guillermo would say, and soon the other road crewmen answered, "Dang right, Guillermo, sing it again!" But one night Guillermo was honest and told the truth. "Ah, my friends, I am no singer." "What do you mean? Of course you are," came the unanimous answer. "Nonsense," Guillermo cried, his voice theatrical. "If I am this great singer, why do you never see me going off to record songs, eh? This is a great singer? Nonsense! Great singers, they raise to be great singers. I'm just a man who loves to sing, but has no talent. I'm a man who loves to work on the road crew with men like you, and sing his guts out. But in the opera, I could never be. Never!" He did not say it sadly. He said it fervently, confidently. "Here is where I belong. I can sing to you who like to hear me sing. I can harmonize with you when I feel a harmony in my heart. But don't be thinking that Guillermo is a great singer, because he's not." It was an evening of honesty, and every man there explained why it was he was happy on the road crew and didn't wish to be anywhere else. Everyone, that is, except Sugar. "Come on, Sugar, aren't you happy here?" Sugar smiled. "I'm happy. I like it here. This is good work for me, and I love to hear you sing." "Then why don't you sing with us?" Sugar shook his head. "I'm not a singer." But Guillermo looked at him knowingly. "Not a singer? Ha! Not a singer. A man without hands who refuses to sing is not a man who is not a singer, eh?" "What the heck did that mean?" asked the man who sang folk songs. "It means that this man you call Sugar, he's a fraud, not a singer. Look at his hands, all his fingers gone. Who is it who cuts off men's fingers?" The road crew didn't try to guess. There were many ways a man could lose fingers, and none of them were anyone's business. "He loses fingers because he breaks the law, and the watchers cut them off. That's how a man loses fingers. What was he doing with his fingers that the watchers wanted him to stop? He was breaking the law, wasn't he?" "Stop," Sugar said. "If you want," Guillermo said. But the others would not respect Sugar's privacy. "Tell us," they said. Sugar left the room. "Tell us," and Guillermo told them. That Sugar must have been a maker who broke the law and was forbidden to make music anymore. The very thought that a maker was working on the road crew with them, even a lawbreaker, filled the men with awe. Makers were rare, and they were the most esteemed of men and women. But why his fingers? "Because," Guillermo said, "he must have tried to make music again afterwards. And when you break the law a second time, the power to break it a third time is taken away from you." Guillermo spoke seriously, and so to the road crew men Sugar's story sounded as majestic and terrible as an opera. They crowded into Sugar's room and found the man staring at the wall. "Sugar, is it true?" asked the man who loved Rodgers and Hammerstein. "Were you a maker?" asked the man who believed. "Yes," Sugar said. "But Sugar," the man who believed said, "God can't mean for a man to stop making music, even if he broke the law." Sugar smiled. "No one asked God." "Sugar," Guillermo finally said, "there are 9 of us on the crew, 9 of us, and we're miles from any other human beings. You know us, Sugar. We swear on our mothers' graves, every one of us, that we'll never tell a soul. Why should we? You're one of us. But sing! Dang it, man, sing!" "I can't," Sugar said. "You don't understand." "It isn't what God intended," said the man who believed. "We're all doing what we love best, and here you are, loving music and not being able to sing a note. Sing for us, sing with us, and only you and us and God will know." They all promised. They all pleaded. And the next day, as the man who loved Rodgers and Hammerstein sang "Look, Love, Away," Sugar began to hum. As the man who believed sang "God of our Fathers," Sugar sang softly along. And as the man who loved folk songs sang "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," Sugar joined in with a strange piping voice, and all the men laughed and cheered and welcomed Sugar's voice to the songs. Inevitably, Sugar began inventing. First harmonies, of course, strange harmonies that made Guillermo frown, and then, after a while, grin as he joined in, sensing as best he could what Sugar was doing to the music. And after harmonies, Sugar began singing his own melodies, with his own words. He made them repetitive, the words simple, and the melodies simpler still, and yet he shaped them into odd shapes and built them into songs that had never been heard of before, that sounded wrong, and yet were absolutely right. It was not long before the man who loved Rodgers and Hammerstein, and the man who sang folk songs, and the man who believed were learning Sugar's songs and singing them joyously, or mournfully, or angrily, or gaily as they worked along the road. Even Guillermo learned the songs, and his strong tenor was changed by them until his voice, which had, after all, been ordinary, became something unusual and fine. Guillermo finally said to Sugar one day, "Hey, Sugar, your music is all wrong, man. But I like the way it feels in my nose. Hey, you know, I like the way it feels in my mouth." Some of the songs were hymns. "Keep me hungry, Lord," Sugar sang, and the road crew sang it too. Some of the songs were love songs. "Put your hands in someone else's pockets," Sugar sang angrily. "I hear your voice in the morning," Sugar sang tenderly. "Is it summer yet?" Sugar sang sadly. And the road crew sang them too. Over the months, the road crew changed, one man leaving on Wednesday and a new man taking his place on Thursday, as different skills were needed in different places. Sugar was silent when each newcomer came, until the man had given his word, and the secret was sure to be kept. What finally destroyed Sugar was the fact that his songs were so unforgettable. The men who left would sing the songs with their new crews, and those crews would learn them and teach them to others. Crewmen taught the songs in bars and on the road. People learned them quickly and loved them. And one day a blind watcher heard the songs and knew instantly who had first sung them. They were Christian Haraldson's music, because in those melodies, simple as they were, the wind of the north woods still whistled, and the fall of leaves still hung oppressively over every note, and the watcher sighed. He took a specialized tool from his file of tools and boarded an airplane and flew to the city closest to where a certain road crew worked. And the blind watcher took a company car with a company driver up the road, and at the end of it, where the road was just beginning to pierce a strip of wilderness, the blind watcher got out of the car and heard a piping voice singing a song that made even an eyeless man weep. "Christian," the watcher said, and the song stopped. "You," said Christian. "Christian, even after you lost your fingers?" The other men didn't understand. All the other men, that is, except Guillermo. "Watcher," said Guillermo. "Watcher, he done no harm." The watcher smiled wryly. "No one said he did, but he broke the law. You, Guillermo. How would you like to work as a servant in a rich man's house? How would you like to be a bank teller?" "Don't take me from the road crew, man," Guillermo said. "It's the law that finds where people will be happy. But Christian Haraldson broke the law, and he's gone around ever since, making people hear music they were never meant to hear." Guillermo knew he had lost the battle before it began. He couldn't stop himself. "Don't hurt him, man. I was meant to hear his music. It's made me happier." The watcher shook his head sadly. "Be honest, Guillermo. You're an honest man. His music's made you miserable, hasn't it? You've got everything you could want in life, and yet his music makes you sad. All the time sad." Guillermo tried to argue. But he was honest, and he looked into his own heart, and he knew that the music was full of grief. Even the happy songs mourned for something. Even the angry songs wept. Even the love songs seemed to say that everything dies and contentment is the most fleeting thing. Guillermo looked in his own heart, and all Sugar's music stared back up at him, and Guillermo wept. "Just don't hurt him, please," Guillermo murmured as he cried. "I won't," the blind watcher said. Then he walked up to Christian, who stood passively waiting, and he held the special tool up to Christian's throat. Christian gasped. "No," Christian said, but the word only formed with his lips and tongue. No sound came out, just a hiss of air. "No." The road crew watched silently as the watcher led Christian away. They did not sing for days, but then Guillermo forgot his grief one day and sang an aria from La Boheme, and the songs went on from there. Now and then they sang one of Sugar's songs, because the songs could not be forgotten. In the city, the blind watcher furnished Christian with a pad of paper and a pen. Christian immediately gripped the pencil in the crease of his palm and wrote, "What do I do now?" The driver read the note aloud, and the blind watcher laughed. "Have we got a job for you? Oh, Christian, have we got a job for you?" The dog barked loudly to hear his master laugh. 5. Applause. In all the world there were only 24 watchers. They were secretive men who supervised a system that needed little supervision because it actually made nearly everybody happy. It was a good system, but like even the most perfect of machines, here and there it broke down. Here and there someone acted madly and damaged himself, and to protect everyone and the person himself, a watcher had to notice the madness and go fix it. For many years the best of the watchers was a man with no fingers, a man with no voice. He would come silently, wearing the uniform that named him with the only name he needed, authority. And he would find the kindest, easiest, yet most thorough way of solving the problem and curing the madness and preserving the system that made the world, for the first time in history, a very good place to live, for practically everyone. For there were still a few people, 1 or 2 each year, who were caught in a circle of their own devising, who could neither adjust to the system nor bear to harm it, people who kept breaking the law despite their knowledge that it would destroy them. Eventually, when the gentle maimings and deprivations did not cure their madness and set them back into the system, they were given uniforms, and they, too, went out, watching. The keys of power were placed in the hands of those who had most cause to hate the system they had to preserve. Were they sorrowful? "I am," Christian answered in the moments he dared to ask himself that question. In sorrow he did his duty. In sorrow he grew old. And finally the other watchers, who reverenced the silent man, for they knew he had once sung magnificent songs, told him he was free. "You served your time," said the watcher with no legs, and he smiled. Christian raised an eyebrow as if to say, "And?" "So wander." Christian wandered. He took off his uniform, but lacking neither money nor time, he found few doors closed to him. He wandered where in his former lives he had once lived. A road in the mountains, a city he had once known the loading entrance of every restaurant and coffee shop and grocery store, and at last to a place in the woods where a house was falling apart in the weather because it had not been used in 40 years. Christian was old. The thunder roared, and it only made him realize that it was about to rain. All the old songs, he mourned inside himself, more because he couldn't remember them than because he thought his life had been particularly sad. As he sat in a coffee shop in a nearby town to stay out of the rain, he heard 4 teenagers who played the guitar very badly singing a song that he knew. It was a song he had invented with the asphalt poured on a hot summer day. The teenagers were not musicians, and they certainly were not makers, but they sang the song from their hearts, and even though the words were happy, the song made everyone who heard it cry. Christian wrote on a pad he always carried and showed his question to the boys. "Where did that song come from?" "It's a Sugar song," the leader of the group answered. It's a song by Sugar." Christian raised an eyebrow, making a shrugging motion. Sugar was a guy who worked on a road crew and made up songs. He's dead now, though," the boy answered. "Best dang songs in the world," another boy said, and they all nodded. Christian smiled. Then he wrote, and the boys waited impatiently for this speechless old man to go away. "Aren't you happy? Why sing sad songs?" The boys were at a loss for an answer. The leader spoke up, though, and said, "Sure, I'm happy. I've got a job, a girl I like, and man, I couldn't ask for more. I got my guitar, I got my songs, and my friends." And another boy said, "These songs aren't sad, mister. Sure, they make people cry, but they aren't sad." "Yeah," said another. "It's just that they were written by a man who knows." Christian scribbled on his paper. "Knows what?" "He just knows. Just knows, that's all. Knows it all." And then the teenagers turned back to their clumsy guitars and their young, untrained voices, and Christian walked to the door to leave because the rain had stopped and because he knew when to leave the stage. He turned and bowed just a little toward the singers. They didn't notice him, but their voices were all the applause he needed. He left the ovation and went outside, where the leaves were just turning color and would soon, with a slight inaudible sound, break free and fall to the earth. For a moment, he thought he heard himself singing, but it was just the last of the wind, coasting madly through the wires over the street. It was a frenzied song, and Christian thought he had recognized his voice.